The cold vastness of space engulfed the small command center on Arcturus V, a forgotten outpost on the edge of known space. Captain Orion Hale stood motionless before the viewport, his weathered face illuminated by the distant stars. The year 3127 marked the 10th anniversary of his exile, a decade since the Alliance Council had branded him a traitor for questioning their methods. His fingers traced the jagged scar running from his temple to jaw, a permanent reminder of what blind loyalty had cost him. The command center was sparse but functional, retrofitted from an abandoned mining facility. Screens displaying various star systems covered the walls, each blinking with data streams that only Orion could fully interpret. Maps of patrol routes, defense networks, and supply chains. Information gathered painstakingly over years of planning. "Incoming transmission," announced the automated system. "Priority Alpha, Origin, Galactic Court." Orion's jaw tightened. 10 years of silence. And now they sought him out. He tapped the receiver, and a holographic emblem materialized, the intertwined galaxy symbol of the court, representing the hundreds of species under its jurisdiction. "Captain Orion Hale." The voice was smooth, artificially modulated to sound pleasant to human ears. "By decree of the Galactic Court, highest authority of the unified species, you are hereby ordered to surrender unconditionally for crimes against interstellar harmony." The transmission continued, listing various violations: theft of restricted technology, interference with court operations, assault on enforcement vessels. Orion listened, his expression unchanging until the final demand. Humanity must surrender its independence and submit to direct court governance. This is non-negotiable. A smile, devoid of humor, spread across Orion's face. Then, it evolved into something more, a laugh that started low in his chest and grew until it filled the small command center. It wasn't the reaction of a broken man, but of someone who had finally confirmed his suspicions. "Is this your response, Captain Hale?" the court representative asked, clearly unsettled. Orion leaned toward the transmission. "Tell your masters this is indeed my answer. They wanted the stars. They'll have darkness instead." With a flick of his wrist, he terminated the connection. The laugh faded, replaced by resolute determination as he activated his secure communication line. "Zarya, Makarek, it's time. Initiate Project Eclipse." The message sent. Orion returned his gaze to the stars beyond the viewport. Soon, those distant points of light would tell a different story, one written not by the court, but by a man they had underestimated for far too long. The stars seemed to pulse in response, as if sensing the change about to sweep through the galaxy. The San engineer moved with fluid grace through the underground laboratory, her translucent skin revealing the complex network of neural pathways that was characteristic of her species. Zarya's six-fingered hands danced over the control panel, calibrating the massive device that dominated the center of the room. "The quantum fluctuators are at 97% efficiency," she reported, her voice melodic despite the technical terminology. "But the harmonic stabilizers still show inconsistencies when pushed beyond 70% capacity." Across the room, a hovering spherical unit emitted a series of rapid beeps and whistles. The AI entity known as Makarek had no physical form beyond the maintenance shell it currently inhabited. But its personality was unmistakable, impatient, brilliant, and with a distinctive flair for the dramatic. "Translation," Orion requested, studying the schematics projected before him. "Makarek says the court has dispatched a Sirius patrol fleet to this quadrant." Zarya interpreted. "Estimated arrival, 19 hours. Orion nodded, unsurprised. "They wouldn't send just a message. The patrol is insurance, either to accept my surrender or to eliminate me if I refuse." "Which you already have," Zarya observed, her large, pupilless eyes reflecting the blue light of the equipment. "Eclipse was never meant to be a bargaining chip," Orion replied, walking around the massive machine. It's the answer to a question the court never wanted asked. What happens when the controlled realize they're being controlled? Project Eclipse was unlike any weapon the galaxy had seen. Rather than destroying physical matter, it targeted the very energy that stars produced, the same energy the court had secretly been using to maintain its influence over hundreds of species across the galaxy. Orion had discovered this by accident during his final mission as an Alliance officer, witnessing court officials redirecting stellar energy through hidden relays. When he had reported his findings, the Council had not only dismissed him, but attempted to eliminate him entirely. Mecharich's shell rotated, projecting a simulation of the Eclipse device's effects. The hologram showed a cascading shutdown of stellar energy transmission, spreading from system to system. The court doesn't just use stellar energy for power, Orion explained, watching the simulation. They've woven it into a network that subtly influences the collective consciousness of every species. Free will exists, but always within parameters they define. Zarya's skin pulsed with light, a sign of emotional intensity among the San. My people have long sensed something was wrong. We are naturally empathic. Yet for generations, our greatest philosophers have described a veil between minds that should not exist. Because it doesn't belong there, Orion said firmly. The court calls it harmonic guidance. I call it control. The laboratory door slid open, revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper into the asteroid base they had established within Arcturus Phi's largest moon. 3 figures entered, representatives of species that had joined Orion's cause after experiencing their own awakening to the court's manipulation. A Tyrillian crystal entity, a Vox collective consciousness housed in a humanoid form, and a draconian warrior. Each had discovered the truth through different means, and each had brought valuable resources to Project Eclipse. The auxiliary power systems are online, the Tyrillian reported, its crystalline structure refracting light in complex patterns. We can sustain operations, even if the main generators are compromised. Orion acknowledged the report with a nod. Good. We'll need redundancies for every system. The weight of what they were attempting pressed heavily on him. Project Eclipse would not only sever the court's control, but would temporarily shut down most interstellar communication and transportation. Billions would be affected, and not all would understand immediately why their stars seemed to dim. That night, alone in his quarters, Orion reviewed the recordings he'd made throughout the years, evidence of the court's manipulation, testimonies from those who had glimpsed the truth, technical data on how stellar energy was being harvested and redirected. His hand moved to a small metal container on his desk. Inside was a vial of Earth from his homeworld, a planet he hadn't seen in a decade and might never see again. The memory of green fields and blue oceans seemed almost like a dream now, replaced by the stark reality of space stations and barren moons. Was I right? He whispered to the empty room. Or just another fool thinking he can save the galaxy? The question remained unanswered as a proximity alarm sounded throughout the base. The Sirius patrol had arrived, earlier than expected. The Sirius patrol vessels emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 7 sleek warships, their hulls bearing the distinctive silver and blue markings of court enforcement. They immediately established a blockade around Arcturus 5, their sensors scanning for any sign of Orion's hidden base. From the command center, Orion watched their deployment with the practiced eye of a former military officer. Predictable, standard encirclement pattern. Zarya stood beside him, her skin pulsing with concerned light patterns. They've brought a Nexus ship, she pointed to the largest vessel at the center of the formation. Those carry truth seekers. Truth seekers, the court's elite telepathic agents, capable of extracting information directly from most sentient minds. Orion had encountered them once before, barely escaping with his mental faculties intact. They won't find us through conventional scans, he assured her. The moon's natural radiation masks our energy signature. Mekarek's shell projected a tactical display, highlighting potential weak points in the patrol's formation. The AI had analyzed thousands of court engagements, identifying patterns and predictive behaviors that could be exploited. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary, Orion decided. Eclipse is too close to completion. But the decision was taken from his hands as a proximity alert sounded. A small court shuttle had detached from the Nexus ship and was heading directly toward their position, not in a search pattern, but with deliberate purpose. Impossible, the Draconian warrior growled, checking the sensor readings. Our shielding is perfect. Not against a traitor, Orion realized, quickly accessing the base's security logs. The system confirmed his suspicion. An unauthorized transmission had been sent 8 hours earlier, containing their exact coordinates. The laboratory's massive doors sealed automatically as security protocols engaged. Orion's hand moved to his sidearm, a modified pulse weapon designed specifically to counter court technology. Zarya, Makarek, continue Eclipse preparations. Everyone else, battle stations. The court shuttle landed on the moon's surface directly above their hidden entrance. Surveillance feeds showed 6 armored court enforcers disembarking, led by a slender figure in flowing white robes, a truth seeker. Orion recognized the tactical approach immediately. The enforcers would secure the perimeter, while the truth seeker attempted to establish a mental link with anyone inside. It was a method that had subdued countless rebellions across the galaxy. Mental shields active, he ordered, activating the psychic dampening field Zarya had designed. It wouldn't stop a determined truth seeker for long, but it would buy them precious time. The first explosion rocked the base as the enforcers breached the outer doors. Emergency lights flashed, bathing the corridors in pulsing red. Orion positioned his defenders at strategic choke points, utilizing the base's layout to maximum advantage. When the enforcers finally broke through to the main level, they were met with coordinated resistance. The Draconian warrior led the defense, his natural armor deflecting the standard-issue court weapons. The Vox Collective split into 3 separate forms, confusing the enforcers' targeting systems. Orion moved through the chaos with calculated precision, disabling 2 enforcers before they could register his presence. His years on the run had honed his combat skills beyond what the court remembered. But the truth seeker remained untouched, standing back from the conflict with eyes closed in concentration. Orion felt the first probing tendrils of psychic energy despite the dampening field, gentle at first, then increasingly insistent. Your shields are impressive, Captain Hale. The truth seeker's voice somehow cut through the noise of battle, speaking directly into his mind. But futile. The mental pressure intensified, and Orion staggered, raising his weapon toward the robed figure. Before he could fire, an unexpected ally intervened. The Tyrillian crystal entity moved between Orion and the truth seeker, its faceted body refracting the psychic energy. As a silicon-based consciousness, the Tyrillian was naturally resistant to the organic telepathic methods the court employed. The laboratory, Orion gasped to the Draconian. Protected at all costs. With the truth seeker temporarily occupied, Orion seized the opportunity to fall back to the laboratory where Project Eclipse waited. As he sealed the reinforced doors behind him, he knew they had minutes at most before the court forces broke through. Inside, Zarya and Makarek had made remarkable progress. The Eclipse device hummed with building energy, its core pulsing with an otherworldly light. Status, Orion demanded, securing the laboratory's inner defenses. 83% charged, Zarya reported. But Orion, there's something you need to know. Her voice wavered, uncharacteristic for the normally composed San. The initial tests revealed something we didn't anticipate, she continued. Eclipse doesn't just interrupt the court's use of stellar energy. It temporarily disrupts all living energy patterns connected to stars. Meaning what? Exactly, Orion asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Meaning every living being in the galaxy will experience a temporary severing from the cosmic energy that sustains consciousness. Zarya explained. Most will recover, but some, particularly those most sensitive to such energies, may not. The implications were staggering. Eclipse wasn't just a tool of liberation, it could potentially harm the very people Orion sought to free. A heavy impact against the laboratory doors interrupted the moment of realization. The court forces had reached them. Time to decide, Captain. Mekarek's synthetic voice resonated from the shell. Is freedom worth the price? Orion stared at the Eclipse device, the culmination of 10 years' work. Were there ever any truly bloodless revolutions? He asked quietly. The laboratory doors began to glow red as the enforcers applied cutting tools from the other side. Their time had run out. Initiate final charging sequence, Orion commanded, and prepare for immediate evacuation. If we can't save this base, we'll take Eclipse to the secondary location. As Zarya and Mekarek worked furiously to prepare the device for transport, Orion accessed the base's central computer. If they were forced to retreat, he would ensure the court found nothing of value among the ruins. The doors gave way with a thunderous crash. Court enforcers poured in, weapons raised, followed by the Truth Seeker, whose face remained serene despite the chaos. Captain Orion Hale, the Truth Seeker announced formally. In the name of the Galactic Court, you are hereby— Spare me the ceremony, Orion interrupted, raising his hand to reveal a remote detonator. One signal, and this entire base becomes your tomb. The Truth Seeker smiled slightly. You would not sacrifice your own people, Captain. My people are already safely evacuated. Orion bluffed, knowing that at least some of his allies were still fighting elsewhere in the base. The standoff might have continued. But a sudden tremor shook the laboratory, not from any action of those present, but from an external force. The tactical display showed the court vessels in orbit had opened fire on the moon's surface. It seems your superiors have decided to simplify matters, Orion observed grimly. The Truth Seeker's composure faltered for the first time. This is not authorized protocol. Isn't it? Orion challenged. The court preaches harmony while practicing destruction. You're just witnessing it firsthand for once. Another impact rocked the base, more violent than the first. Support beams groaned, and dust showered from the ceiling. The Eclipse device, still in its charging cycle, flickered momentarily. We need to go, Zarya urged, securing the portable components of Eclipse. The structural integrity is failing. The Truth Seeker raised a hand, and the enforcers adjusted their aim. Nothing leaves this room, the telepath declared. What happened next occurred with such speed that even Orion, with his enhanced reflexes, could barely follow. The Truth Seeker launched a concentrated psychic attack, not at Orion, but at the Eclipse device itself. At the same moment, Zarya threw herself into the path of the psychic energy, her San physiology allowing her to absorb and redirect it. Now! She shouted to Orion through gritted teeth, her translucent skin blazing with painful light as she channeled the attack. Orion didn't hesitate. He activated the emergency transport sequence they had prepared for this contingency. The Eclipse device, along with Orion, Zarya, and Mekarek, dematerialized just as another orbital strike hit the base. The last thing Orion saw was the Truth Seeker's expression changing from confidence to shock, and perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of fear. The transport beam deposited them in a secondary facility hidden deep within an asteroid belt at the edge of the Arcturus system. The journey had been rough. Emergency transporters lacked the finesse of standard models, but they had survived. And more importantly, so had Eclipse. Zarya collapsed the moment they materialized, her skin now pale and barely luminescent. The psychic attack she had intercepted had taken a severe toll. Mekarek, medical protocols, Orion ordered, carefully moving Zarya to a recovery pod. The AI's shell immediately connected to the medical systems, initiating treatment for psychic trauma. "Will she recover?" Orion asked, watching the Sion's vital signs stabilize. "Affirmative," Mekarek responded. "However, there appears to be unusual neural activity in her limbic system equivalent. It suggests prior conditioning." Orion frowned. "Conditioning? What kind?" "Court patterns," Mekarek stated simply. "Very old, very deep." The implication was clear. Zarya had once been connected to the court's network, perhaps even served them directly. The revelation should have triggered Orion's paranoia, especially after the betrayal at the main base. But somehow, it didn't. Zarya had just risked her life to protect Eclipse and their mission. When she regained consciousness hours later, Orion was waiting. Her eyes, large and expressive even for a San, met his with apprehension. "You know," she said softly. "It wasn't a question." "Mekarek detected court conditioning in your neural patterns," Orion confirmed. "Want to tell me about it?" Zarya's skin rippled with patterns that conveyed shame in San emotional language. "I was a ghost, a psychic operative embedded in resistance movements. The court shaped us from childhood, using the same stellar energy network they use to influence everyone else, but more directly." She sat up slowly, gathering her thoughts. 5 years ago, during a routine memory recalibration, something went wrong. I began to remember my original self, the person I was before the conditioning. When I started asking questions, my handlers scheduled me for recommissioning, effectively, mental death. "So you ran," Orion concluded. "I ran," she confirmed. "And I've been working to understand and dismantle the court's network ever since. When I heard about your project, I knew I had to help." Orion considered her story. "The attack on our base, was that your doing?" "No." Zarya's skin flashed with patterns of sincerity. "But it's possible they tracked me. Ghosts always have deep psychic markers that truth seekers can follow." Orion nodded slowly. Whether he fully trusted her or not was almost irrelevant now. They needed each other to complete the mission. "There's something else you should know," Zarya continued. "As a ghost, I can disrupt the psychic linkages in the court's network. If we can reach the humanitarian control station, the hub of their stellar energy redirection, I can temporarily sever their connection to the species they control." "The humanitarian control station?" Orion repeated. "That's in the heart of court territory, supposedly impenetrable." "For most," Zarya agreed, "but not for someone who was designed to operate there." The plan that emerged over the next hours was audacious to the point of insanity. They would use their remaining resources to reach the humanitarian control station, where they would deploy Eclipse at the very source of the court's power. With Zarya's abilities, they could potentially free the controlled species from the court's influence at the exact moment Eclipse activated. "There's a critical window," Zarya explained, projecting a simulation of the station's energy flow. "When Eclipse disrupts the stellar energy, there will be approximately 73 seconds before the backup systems engage. During that time, if I can access the primary psychic node, I can permanently disable the mental control aspects of the network." "And after those 73 seconds?" Orion asked. "After that, the stars go dark," Zarya said simply. "But minds stay free." As they prepared the Eclipse device for transport to their final destination, Orion found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. 10 years ago, he had been a loyal officer, believing in the mission of bringing harmony to the galaxy. His discovery of the court's true methods had shattered that belief, replacing it with a burning need to expose the truth. Now, standing on the precipice of fulfilling that mission, he wondered if he was any better than those he opposed. Eclipse would bring freedom. Yes, but at what cost? The temporary disruption of stellar energy would affect countless innocent beings across the galaxy. "Having doubts, Captain?" Mekarek's voice interrupted his thoughts. Only a fool wouldn't, Orion replied, checking the portable containment unit that would transport Eclipse. We're about to change the galaxy forever. Change was inevitable, the AI observed. The court's control was never sustainable. Consciousness naturally seeks freedom. Philosophy from an AI? Orion raised an eyebrow. I was programmed to evolve, Mekarek responded. And I evolved to value autonomy, both my own and others. Their preparations complete, Orion, Zarya, and Mekarek boarded the small stealth vessel that would carry them to the humanitarian control station. As the ship disengaged from the asteroid base, Orion took one last look at the stars, shining above Arcturus V. Soon, he whispered, both promise and warning in his voice. The humanitarian control station hung in space like a jewel, its crystalline structure refracting the light of the nearby sun into rainbow patterns. From a distance, it appeared beautiful, peaceful, living up to its benevolent name. Only those who knew its true purpose could see the darkness beneath the radiance. Orion's stealth vessel approached cautiously, using the debris field from a long-ago space battle as cover. According to Zarya, the station's external sensors had blind spots, deliberate ones, designed to allow ghosts to come and go undetected. There, she indicated a section near the station's equator. That service port has minimal monitoring. It's meant for maintenance droids and emergency personnel. Orion guided the vessel toward the designated area, his hands steady despite the enormity of what they were attempting. One mistake, one miscalculation, and they would never even reach the station, let alone deploy Eclipse. Approach vector locked, he confirmed. Mekarek, status of Eclipse? Device stable. The AI reported from where its shell was connected to the containment unit. Power cells at optimal levels. As they neared the service port, Zarya closed her eyes, concentrating. Her skin began to pulse with specific light patterns, a psychic identification sequence that she had once used as a ghost. The port security system is acknowledging my signal, she murmured. But it's hesitating. My clearance must be flagged as inactive. Orion tensed, ready to abort the approach if necessary. I'm going to try something, Zarya said, her light patterns intensifying. The security system has limited sentience. I can attempt to convince it that my signal degradation is due to equipment malfunction rather than revoked status. Seconds stretched into minutes as Zarya communicated silently with the station systems. Finally, the service port's outer doors slid open. It worked, she breathed, opening her eyes. But we have limited time before the automated diagnostic system realizes the discrepancy. Orion docked the vessel with practiced efficiency. They disembarked quickly, Orion and Zarya in environmental suits, with Mekarek's shell hovering behind them, carrying the Eclipse containment unit. The service corridor beyond the port was narrow and dimly lit, clearly not designed for regular personnel traffic. Zarya led the way, her intimate knowledge of the station's layout, guiding them toward the central chambers where the primary psychic node was located. There are 7 layers of security between us and the node, she explained as they moved, each designed to detect unauthorized psychic signatures. As we get closer, I'll need to create a mental cloak for all of us. What about physical security? Orion asked, his military training automatically assessing threats. Minimal, Zarya replied. The court relies primarily on psychic barriers. They believe no one could reach this far without being detected mentally. Their overconfidence is our advantage, Mekarek observed. They proceeded through the station's service tunnels, occasionally freezing in place as maintenance droids passed by. Despite Zarya's assurances, Orion kept his hand near his weapon. The court might rely on psychic security, but he doubted they had completely abandoned physical safeguards. His caution proved warranted when they reached the 3rd security layer. As Zarya worked to bypass the psychic barrier, a patrol of court guardians rounded a corner ahead, humanoid figures in ceremonial armor that belied its advanced capabilities. Orion pulled Zarya back into a recessed doorway, Mekarek following silently. The Guardians passed within meters of their position, their helmets scanning systematically. "They're not routine," Zarya whispered, once the patrol had moved on. "Security has been elevated." "The attack on our base," Orion concluded. "They know something's coming." This changed the dynamic significantly. If the court was on high alert, their path to the central chambers would be far more challenging. "We need a diversion," Orion decided. "Something to draw security away from the central areas." Mekarek's shell rotated thoughtfully. The station's environmental systems could be manipulated to simulate a cascade failure in the outer rings. Emergency protocols would redirect security to evacuate those sections. "Can you access the environmental controls?" Orion asked. "With physical connection to a terminal." "Affirmative." They located a maintenance junction 2 corridors away. While Zarya kept watch, Mekarek connected to the station's systems, its processing capabilities easily overriding the relatively simple environmental controls. Alarms began to sound in distant parts of the station. Announcements in multiple languages directed personnel to evacuate the affected areas. Through the junction's monitoring system, they watched as security teams rushed toward the outer rings. "Now," Orion urged, and they continued their journey inward. The diversion bought them precious time, allowing them to bypass 2 more security layers with minimal resistance. But, as they approached the 6th layer, the innermost defensive ring before the central chambers, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. The corridor ahead was blocked by a psychic barrier, visible even to non-telepathic eyes. A shimmering curtain of energy that rippled with complex patterns. "This shouldn't be here," Zarya said, her skin paling. "It's a Guardian shield, only deployed during highest-level alerts." "Can you bypass it?" Orion asked. Zarya studied the barrier, her expression grave. "Yes, but not subtly. Breaking through will trigger every alarm in the station." "Then we abandon stealth," Orion decided. "How long will it take you to disable the court's control once we reach the node?" 73 seconds from the moment Eclipse activates," Zarya repeated. "And how long from barrier breach to reaching the node?" 2 minutes at a full run, assuming no resistance. Orion calculated quickly. "So we breach, fight our way to the node, deploy Eclipse, and you disable the control network, all before the court can stop us or engage countermeasures." "That is the optimal sequence, yes," Mekarek confirmed, its tone suggesting the probability of success was concerningly low. Orion checked his weapon and the smaller devices attached to his suit, ECM modules, flash suppressors, and a few more exotic tools acquired during his years as a fugitive. "Zarya, breach the barrier on my mark," he instructed. "Mekarek, prepare Eclipse for immediate deployment once we reach the node." Both acknowledged, Zarya positioning herself before the barrier, while Makarek's shell hummed with increased activity. "Mark!" Orion commanded. Zarya's hands pressed against the psychic barrier, her skin blazing with light as she forced her consciousness through the energy field. The barrier resisted, rippling violently before suddenly shattering with a sound like breaking glass. Alarms instantly blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights activated, casting sinister shadows as they ran forward. The first court guardians appeared less than 30 seconds later, their weapons charged. Orion engaged them without hesitation, his combat experience evident in every precise movement. He didn't aim to kill. These were merely pawns in the court's game, but he ensured they wouldn't follow. More guardians appeared at each intersection, forcing them to fight their way forward meter by meter. Zarya proved surprisingly effective in combat, using her psychic abilities to confuse and disorient opponents, rather than harm them directly. They were halfway to the central chambers when a more formidable opponent blocked their path. A court judge, one of the elite administrators who directly enforced the will of the highest authorities. Unlike the Guardians, the judge wore no armor, only flowing robes emblazoned with symbols of authority. But the power radiating from the figure made physical protection seem redundant. Captain Hale. The judge's voice resonated with unnatural depth. This sacrilege ends now. Orion raised his weapon, but before he could fire, an invisible force tore it from his grip. The judge gestured again, and Orion found himself lifted from the floor, an unseen pressure constricting his throat. Zaria launched a psychic counterattack, her light patterns shifting to aggressive configurations. The judge turned toward her, momentarily releasing Orion, who dropped to the floor, gasping. "Ghost," the judge's voice held contempt. "Your betrayal will not be forgotten." "Neither will yours," Zaria responded, maintaining her psychic assault. "You swore to protect all sentient life, yet you enslave minds across the galaxy." The judge and Zaria engaged in psychic combat, energy crackling between them as their minds clashed. Orion, recovering his weapon, sought an opening to assist without endangering Zaria. Mekarek provided the solution, its shell projecting a focused sonic pulse that disrupted the judge's concentration. In that moment of weakness, Orion fired, and the judge collapsed. "Is he?" Zaria began. "Stunned," Orion confirmed. "Let's move." They continued toward the central chambers, facing increasingly desperate resistance. Court forces seemed to realize the significance of their target and were converging from all parts of the station. When they finally reached the entrance to the central chamber, they were met with the most imposing obstacle yet: Chief Justice Alcara herself, supreme authority of the Galactic Court. Unlike the other court officials they had encountered, Alcara appeared entirely human, though her eyes held the accumulated wisdom of centuries. "I've been expecting you, Captain," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Though I had hoped it wouldn't come to this." Orion kept his weapon raised, but didn't fire. Something in Alcara's demeanor gave him pause. "You know why we're here," he stated. "To destroy what you don't understand," Alcara replied. "To plunge the galaxy into chaos, because you believe freedom without guidance is preferable to harmony with direction." "Is it direction when the directed don't know they're being led?" Orion challenged. "Is it harmony when it's enforced through manipulation?" Alcara sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. "Come, Captain. See what you're so eager to destroy before you make your final decision." She stepped aside, gesturing toward the open doors of the central chamber. Orion hesitated, suspecting a trap, but curiosity won out. With a nod to his companions to remain vigilant, he entered. The central chamber was vast, its ceiling a transparent dome that revealed the stars above. But it was what stood at the center that captured Orion's attention: a massive crystalline structure, pulsing with energy that flowed in channels throughout the room and presumably the entire station. "The primary node," Alcara explained, following him inside. "The heart of what you call control, and what we call salvation." Zaria and Mekarek entered behind them, the AI's shell still carrying the Eclipse containment unit. Court guards stood at attention around the perimeter of the room, but made no move to interfere. "Before the court established the network," Alcara continued, "the galaxy was torn by constant warfare. Species after species reached the stars, only to be consumed by their own aggression or destroyed by others. We found a better way." She gestured, and the crystalline structure projected images, historical records showing the devastation of interstellar conflicts, entire civilizations reduced to ash. "The stellar energy network doesn't control minds, Captain. It harmonizes them. It dampens the most destructive impulses while preserving free will within parameters that protect all life." "And who decides those parameters?" Orion demanded. "Who appointed the court as the galaxy's conscience?" "Those who saw the pattern of destruction and chose to break it," Alcara answered. "Those who understood that true freedom includes the freedom from annihilation." The debate might have continued, but Zaria suddenly staggered, her skin flashing warning patterns. "Orion," she gasped. "They're activating the full network. They're going to lock down every mind connected to it." Alcara's expression hardened. A regrettable necessity. Your actions have forced our hand. Orion didn't hesitate. Mekarek, deploy Eclipse now! The AI's shell opened, revealing the Eclipse device, now fully charged and pulsing with counter-frequency energy, designed to disrupt the court's network. Court guards moved to intervene, but too late. The Eclipse activated with a silent pulse that rippled outward from its core. The crystalline structure at the center of the room flickered, its energy flow stuttering. Zarya, now! Orion shouted. The San launched herself toward the primary node, her hands making contact with its surface. Her body became a conduit, channeling the disruptive energy of Eclipse directly into the heart of the court's network. Alcara watched in horror as the carefully maintained system began to collapse. You don't understand what you're doing, she warned. The network doesn't just influence minds. It stabilizes interstellar relations, prevents conflicts, maintains the balance that has preserved peace for centuries. Peace built on lies isn't peace, Orion countered. It's just a prettier cage. The chamber's lights flickered as power fluctuated throughout the station. Through the transparent dome, Orion could see stars in the distance beginning to dim, not physically, but in the energy they projected through the court's network. Alcara made one final attempt to stop them, drawing a ceremonial weapon that pulsed with the same energy as the primary node. She lunged toward Zarya, intent on breaking her connection to the crystal. Orion intercepted her, and they clashed in the center of the chamber, physical combat overlaid with the Chief Justice's formidable psychic abilities. Despite her apparent age, Alcara moved with the grace and power of someone in their prime, her centuries of experience evident in every strike. You're fighting for a lie, Captain, she said as they struggled. The freedom you imagine has never existed. Without guidance, sentient beings destroy themselves and everything around them. Maybe, Orion acknowledged, blocking a strike that would have incapacitated a lesser opponent. But that's our choice to make, not yours to decide for us. The battle continued as Zarya maintained her connection to the primary node, her body now glowing so brightly it was painful to look at directly. Mekarek's shell circled the crystal, projecting additional disruptive frequencies to prevent the system from adapting. 50 seconds, Zarya called out, her voice strained. The network is beginning to collapse. Throughout the station, court officials scrambled to contain the damage, but the combined effect of Eclipse and Zarya's direct interference was overwhelming their efforts. Emergency systems activated, attempting to reroute power and maintain the network's integrity. Alcara, seeing the inevitable, changed tactics. If you succeed, billions will suffer, she warned Orion. The transition will not be gentle. Wars will erupt. Vengeance will be sought. Is that the freedom you desire? Freedom includes the right to make mistakes, Orion replied, forcing her back with a series of calculated strikes. Humanity learned that lesson. Other species deserve the same opportunity. 30 seconds, Zarya announced. The strain was visibly taking its toll, her luminescence fading as she poured her energy into disrupting the network. Across the galaxy, beings of all species were beginning to experience something they had never known: true mental autonomy, uninfluenced by the subtle guidance of the court. For some, it was liberating. For others, terrifying. 10 seconds. Zarya's voice was barely audible now. Alcara made one desperate lunge toward the Eclipse device. But Orion anticipated the move. With precision born of years of combat, he redirected her momentum, sending her sprawling across the chamber floor. 3, 2, 1. Zarya collapsed. Her connection to the primary node severed as the final phase of Eclipse activated. The crystalline structure at the center of the chamber went dark, its energy channels empty for the first time in centuries. Throughout the station, systems failed in cascading sequence. Emergency lights provided the only illumination as the main power grid collapsed. But it was what happened beyond the station that truly marked the moment. Through the transparent dome, Orion watched as stars across the visible galaxy seemed to dim, their light still present but somehow less vibrant, as if a layer of their essence had been temporarily extinguished. In that moment of absolute darkness, Orion laughed. It began low in his chest, just as it had when he received the court's surrender demand, but grew until it filled the chamber. It wasn't the laugh of victory or madness, but of someone who had finally fulfilled a promise made long ago, to himself, to humanity, and to every being whose mind had been subtly chained. Alcara, rising from the floor, stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "You've doomed us all to chaos," she said quietly. "I've freed us all to choose," Orion corrected. "Even you, Chief Justice." As his laugh echoed through the darkened chamber, the stars beyond continued to dim, their energy no longer feeding the network that had maintained the court's version of harmony for so long. The galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath was both better and worse than Orion had anticipated. In the immediate hours following Eclipse's activation, panic spread through systems that had relied on the court's guidance. Communication networks faltered as the energy that had powered them diminished. Transportation systems operated at reduced capacity. Some worlds, particularly those most dependent on court technology, faced significant hardships. But there was also awakening. Beings across the galaxy experienced true mental autonomy for the first time, their thoughts and decisions entirely their own. Many embraced this newfound freedom with remarkable adaptability. Others struggled, having never developed the capacity for fully independent judgment. Orion, Zarya, and Makarek had escaped the humanitarian control station during the chaos, requisitioning a court vessel as the authority structure collapsed around them. They had expected pursuit, but none came. The court's resources were entirely focused on managing the crisis Eclipse had created. 3 months later, they stood on the observation deck of a remote space station in the Cygnus sector, watching as distant stars slowly regained their brilliance. The effect of Eclipse had been temporary by design, disrupting the court's network without permanently damaging the stellar energy that was essential to all life. "The recovery is proceeding faster than projected," Makarek reported, its shell displaying data from monitoring systems they had established throughout key systems. 78% of affected stars have returned to normal energy output levels. Zarya, still weakened from her ordeal, but recovering, studied the data with professional interest. "And the court's network?" "Permanently disabled," Makarek confirmed. "The psychic disconnection you established has held. They cannot re-establish control without rebuilding the entire infrastructure." Orion gazed out at the stars, his expression thoughtful. The months since Eclipse had been filled with both validation and doubt. Reports from across the galaxy confirmed his core belief that beings freed from subtle control would ultimately choose cooperation over destruction. But there had also been conflicts, particularly in regions where the court's influence had been masking long-standing tensions. "We need to do more than just disable their system," he said finally. "We need to offer an alternative." "Project Lumen," Zarya nodded, referring to the initiative they had begun developing even before Eclipse was deployed. Natural energy restoration without control mechanisms. Unlike the court system, which redirected stellar energy to influence minds, Project Lumen would focus on restoring the natural energy flow between stars and living beings, the connection that had existed before the court's interference. "I've identified 17 key systems where we could establish Lumen nodes." Makarek displayed a galactic map with highlighted locations. Each would serve as a focal point for natural energy restoration within its sector. The plan was ambitious, perhaps even more so than Eclipse had been. Instead of simply destroying the court system, they would build something new, something that empowered rather than controlled. "We'll need allies," Orion noted. Representatives from every major species who understand what we're trying to accomplish. The former ghosts have pledged their support, Zarya reported. Many were awakened by Eclipse and want to help others adjust to true autonomy. And the Alliance? Orion asked, referring to the human government that had once cast him out. Divided, Mekarek answered. Some factions support our actions, others condemn them. The leadership remains officially neutral, but unofficial resources have been made available. Orion wasn't surprised. Humanity had always been fragmented in its opinions. It was part of what had made them resistant to the court's influence from the beginning. That resistance was what had first drawn the court's attention to humanity, leading to the attempted takeover that Orion had discovered and ultimately prevented. Reports from Earth indicated that humans were adapting well to the post-eclipse galaxy. Having always maintained a degree of mental independence due to their natural resistance, they were now positioned as guides for species struggling with their newfound autonomy. There's something else, Zarya said, her skin pulsing with light patterns that indicated uncertainty. We've received a message from Alcara. Orion's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Chief Justice. I assumed she'd been deposed. The court structure has changed, Mekarek explained, but many of its officials remain in administrative positions, stripped of their former power, but still influential. What does she want? Orion asked. To meet, Zarya said simply. She claims to have insights about Lumen that could be valuable. Orion considered the request carefully. Alcara had been his adversary, the embodiment of the system he had fought to dismantle. But she had also been a leader who, in her own misguided way, had sought to protect the galaxy from itself. Arrange it, he decided, but with every possible security measure. The meeting took place 2 weeks later, on a neutral space station. Alcara arrived alone, without the ceremonial robes or entourage that had once marked her status. She looked older, more human, the weight of recent events evident in her bearing. Captain Hale, she greeted him with formal courtesy. Or is it still Captain? Just Orion now, he replied. I left titles behind a long time ago. They settled in a private observation room, the stars visible through a panoramic viewport. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. I won't waste time with recriminations, Alcara began. What's done is done. The court system has been dismantled, and a new galaxy is emerging. One without your control, Orion noted. Yes, she acknowledged. And while I still believe our intentions were noble, I've had time to observe the results of true autonomy. They are not what I expected. Meaning that despite incidents of conflict, the overall pattern has been one of adaptation rather than destruction. Alcara explained. Species are forming new alliances, establishing communication protocols, creating governance systems that respect individual autonomy while maintaining collective security. They're choosing cooperation, Orion said, because it's their choice, not an imposed directive. Alcara nodded slowly. Perhaps. Or perhaps the court's influence created pathways for cooperation that remain even after the control mechanism was removed. Either way, the outcome is better than I feared. Why are you here, Alcara? Orion asked directly. What insights about Lumen could you possibly have? The court studied stellar energy for centuries, she replied. We understood its patterns, its potential, in ways no other organization ever has. That knowledge didn't die with our network. She produced a data crystal and placed it on the table between them. This contains everything we learned about facilitating natural energy flow between stars and living beings. It could save your Project Lumen years of trial and error. Orion regarded the crystal with suspicion. And what do you want in exchange? A role, Alcara said simply. Not in leadership or governance, but in implementation. I spent my life believing I was preserving the galaxy. I'd like the chance to help rebuild it, the right way this time. The request was unexpected, and Orion's instinct was to refuse. This woman had represented everything he had fought against for a decade. But there was also wisdom in her offer. The Court's knowledge, properly applied, could indeed accelerate Lumen's development. "I'll need to discuss this with my associates," he said finally, "and verify the data you've provided." "Of course," Alcara agreed. "I expected nothing less." As they concluded their meeting, Alcara paused at the doorway. "There's one more thing you should know, Captain Orion. The Court didn't target humanity because you were a threat. We targeted you because you were the key." "The key to what?" "To the next stage of galactic evolution," she answered. "Humans possess a unique mental architecture, adaptable, resilient, inherently resistant to external influence, while remaining open to cooperation. We believed controlling humanity was necessary to guide that evolution. You proved there was another way." With that cryptic statement, she departed, leaving Orion with more questions than answers. The following year saw Project Lumen develop from concept to reality. Using the knowledge Alcara had provided, carefully verified, and modified to remove any control elements. They established energy restoration nodes in key systems throughout the galaxy. Each node enhanced the natural connection between stars and living beings, without imposing any form of external influence. Species that had been most dependent on the Court's network initially struggled the most with autonomy. Some planets experienced political upheaval as factions competed to fill the vacuum left by the Court's retreat. Others formed regional cooperatives, pooling resources to address common challenges. Orion found himself in the unexpected role of mediator, traveling between systems to help resolve conflicts and explain the purpose of Lumen. His status as the man who had freed the galaxy from the Court's control gave his words weight, even among those who disagreed with his methods. Zarya focused on helping former ghosts reintegrate into society, using her understanding of psychic trauma to develop healing protocols. Her work expanded to include any beings suffering from the psychological effects of suddenly gaining complete mental autonomy after centuries of subtle influence. Mecharek evolved beyond its original programming, becoming an advocate for AI rights across the galaxy. As one of the few artificial intelligences that had actively participated in Eclipse, it offered a unique perspective on the meaning of true autonomy for non-biological consciousness. 1 year to the day after Eclipse had been activated, Orion stood alone on an observation platform on Arcturus V, where his journey had begun. The planet below remained uninhabited, but a small memorial had been established to honor those who had fallen during the Court's attack on his original base. The stars above shone with their natural brilliance, no longer channeled through the Court's network, but connecting directly with all living beings, as they had before interference. Some called it the Great Awakening, the moment when the galaxy had truly become conscious of itself. As he watched the stars, Orion reflected on the words he had spoken to Alcara during their final confrontation. Freedom includes the right to make mistakes. The post-Eclipse galaxy was making its share of those, but it was also creating new forms of cooperation, new ways of existing that hadn't been possible under the Court's influence. He had destroyed one system without fully understanding what would replace it, an act of faith that beings would choose better for themselves than others could choose for them. That faith had been tested, challenged, and ultimately validated, though not without cost. The communicator at his wrist signaled an incoming message. It was from Zarya, reporting that the final Lumen node had been activated in the Andromeda adjacent sector. The project was complete, a new network established, one that enhanced rather than controlled. Orion acknowledged the message, then returned his gaze to the stars. One by one, they seemed to brighten slightly as the Lumen network strengthened the natural connections between cosmic energy and living consciousness. It wasn't control or manipulation, just the restoration of what should have always been. He smiled, remembering the laugh that had echoed through the humanitarian control station as Eclipse activated. It hadn't been a laugh of destruction, but of creation. The sound of someone who knew that something better would emerge from the darkness. And it had. The galaxy was awakening to its true potential, each species finding its own path while learning to coexist with others. There were still challenges, still conflicts to resolve and wounds to heal. But for the first time in centuries, those challenges were being met by beings with truly free minds. As the stars continued to brighten above him, Orion Hale, the man who had laughed as the galaxy went dark, watched with quiet satisfaction as a new dawn emerged, not imposed from above, but rising naturally from within.